Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We'll be talking about Promise Neighborhoods 2026, doing a funding opportunity overview, and applicant readiness roadmap. So you're in the right session. I see the numbers going up. Welcome in. In the chat, if you want to give us a quick where you're from, that'd be great so we can see who all is here. All right. So in the interest of time, we are going to get started. This will be recorded, so you can share it with colleagues who maybe couldn't make it live here. But we're very excited. I am Lauren Steiner from Grants Plus. We are a consulting firm working with nonprofit organizations around the country on grants funding. We're honored to be partnered with the William Julius Wilson Institute on several projects, including some of this technical assistance for the Promise Neighborhoods program in 2026. And hopefully, by the end of our time together, you'll have a clear picture of the opportunity that exists and assessing your organization's readiness to pursue it potentially. So, I would like to kick it over now to Christian, who is going to give an overview from his perspective of the opportunity.
Great. Lauren, listen, it's a pleasure, honored to be on. I'm so thankful to see such a large number of, people, many I know, a lot that I don't. So if you could just put your name and your city or location, would be so helpful. Shout out to Anthony Robinson, my brother in Miami. I see Christine Sweeney, our friends from Toledo, and so many others. I am thankful, Lauren, to work with Grants Plus. You all have been a partner of ours for a couple years now. Supported us in the Enough applications in Maryland, supporting the technical assistance and grant writing support for many grantees of the Enough Act, and it was so critically important for us at the Harlem Children's Zone to really think about how can we be supportive to the field in this moment. We recognize that the uncertainty at the federal level has created sometimes questions about what's happening, what's not happening. But we also see that the need is greater than we've ever seen before in the field. There are a number of communities that we are working with across the country, people who are looking for solutions, and we recognize that at the Harlem Children's Zone, we are uniquely positioned to support in this moment. Not to bury the lead, we have worked contracted with Grant Plus to support a certain subset of folk who are interested in applying, and for those who are in that who have submitted letters of intent to the Department of Education or to let submit the letters of intent to for the grant. You will be likely hearing from my team as we think about ways to be supportive. About 3 weeks ago, Jeff Canada and I had a chance to meet with representatives of the Department of Health and Human Services and Department of Education who are responsible for this grant. And we did this intentionally because we wanted to make sure that they knew that we were here to be supportive of their efforts as they think about this grant, and that there's extreme excitement and a lot of readiness in the country for this unique opportunity. Largely based off of a lot of the work our friends at Blue Meridian Partners, Balmer Group, and others have been doing in funding place-based partnerships and efforts across the country. There are a number of amazing other national intermediaries who are doing this work across the country as well. And we wanted to make sure they fully understood that we're here to be supportive, that we're here to acknowledge that while there may be some questions, and especially for many new people who are in those seats, that we're here to help. So we will be hosting representatives from both the departments, the Harlem Children's Zone this summer, to be intentional about making sure that we provide support to them for anyone who's working on the grant. And it's really important for folks to understand. I think the legacy of the Promised Neighborhoods grant, these many years later might be a little challenging for people, but ultimately is inspired by Jeff Canada's kind of groundbreaking at the time idea that we could provide wraparound support from cradle to career for young people, children, and families. And we could do so in the way we talk about it at Harm Children's, that we could weave together a net of services so tight that no child would fall through those cracks. And we're excited about this moment because we believe it's needed. Um, and we also believe that it's going to require unique partnerships and ways of doing work that may not have been the ways we've done it before. So we're encouraging, if there's two applicants in the same city and you're 5 minutes from each other, what would it look like to put together a stronger application? I think is a conversation that we must be willing to have, and my team will be willing to support you all in thinking about that. And I think it's fair to say that we should also be paying attention to what the administration's identified as priorities. This is how the grant process works. We should be thinking about how those priorities are aligned or don't align to our efforts. And if they don't align, is my recommendation, Grants Plus will have to say this, that you actually think about whether or not this is the right grant opportunity for you. It's a lot of time and effort and resource that goes into applying for the grant. And we know, based off of history, that very few of us on this call are going to actually get the grant. We know that I shouldn't be, burying the lead on this. So I'm going to really encourage people to think about the opportunity, not to discourage you, but make sure that you're ready and that you also ultimately can live up to the promises you make in the application. Because the worst thing that can happen is that you actually apply and get it, and within that first year, it's clear that you actually cannot hit the goals that you've identified. Um, the last thing I'll just say, just in a moment of transparency, is that at the Harlem Children's Zone, we get $0. We have never gotten one penny from the Department of Education as relates to this grant. Um, this grant, while inspired by us, we primarily support communities across the country who are interested in taking on this creative career effort. So, whether organizations on this call get the grant or not, whether you apply for the grant or not, here's our commitment. Here's my personal commitment that I can charge the 30 members of my team to execute. We will help any organization who's interested in continuing their efforts, whether you get the grant or not. We will make sure that you are provided a proper technical assistance and support. And we will do our best to ensure that you actually can think about how you live the ideals that you're thinking about applying for. So with that, Lauren, I'll pass back to you. I will
Thank
stay on. If there's
Awesome.
questions in the chat, I'll do my best to try to respond and look forward to seeing. Hey, Aaron, I see you from Evansville. Look forward to talking to you all later. Have a good day.
Thanks, Christian. Thank you so much. And just to echo, we really believe that place-based and cradle to career work is some of the most meaningful work that we get to work on in this country. And so that is one of the reasons we jumped at the chance to provide this session to you. So I'm going to kick it back over to Marissa Hoffman from our team. Marissa, will you go through the roadmap that I skipped over about where we're going, and then you can take it away?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lauren. My name is Marissa Hoffman. I am a consultant here at Grants Plus, and I'm happy to be here with you all today to walk through this presentation. Thank you, Jody, for heading back to the roadmap. So just to orient all of us where we are in this presentation, we've now gone through the introduction. We're in the roadmap right now. We did just hear from Christian about framing the moment, his thoughts, and kind of getting into the mindset of what it would look like to apply for this opportunity. We'll then move into understanding the opportunity itself, the ins, the outs, what we need, what you need to do if you're considering applying, and then how to move forward with that application. Then we'll go through some insider tips to creating a successful application, what it looks like to be competitive. And then finally, we'll end with tips and tricks for success from our experienced team here at Grants Plus and beyond. So Jody, if you could please move forward a few slides. Thank you. So we'll move into our first discussion section, which is understanding the opportunity. Next slide, please. So just to give you a snapshot of this opportunity, this is the Promise Neighborhoods grant administered by HHS ACF on behalf of the U.S. Department of Education. The purpose is to improve academic and developmental outcomes for children and youth in distressed communities through cradle to career pipeline of school, family, and community supports. There's an estimated 65 million in funding available through this opportunity, with about 12 implementation awards expected at this time. The award size is estimated to be about 4 to 6 million per award, and the project period is 6 months. 60 months, excuse me, which is 5 years. The deadline, just to put it up front, so we're all framing our timeline and our thinking around it, is coming up pretty quickly. It is August 6th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Next slide, please. Key dates. These are things that you and your team should be keeping in mind right off the bat, framing your internal work process based on these key dates. So the application was made available on May 8th of this year. The notice of intent to apply was due on June 22nd. We here just want to acknowledge up front, this deadline has passed. However, many of you may have already submitted your notices of intents to apply. And if you haven't, just flagging that this is strongly encouraged but not binding. So you may still apply even if you did not submit a notice of intent. The full application is due on August 6th, and the intergovernmental review deadline is October 6th. Next slide, please. So who is involved? Who are the players? What does it look like? Who do you need to involve in these initial decisions? And who do you need to get started? So the eligible applicants include institutions of higher education, Indian tribes or tribal organizations, or one or more nonprofit entities working in a formal partnership with at least one required partner. So for nonprofit partners, a nonprofit applicant must partner with at least one of the following, and they're listed here on the slide for your reference, or if you're watching this later. Must partner with either a high-need local educational agency, an institution of higher education, the office of a chief elected official of local government, an Indian tribe or tribal organization. Also just flagging that nonprofits must be able to document nonprofit status, such as a 501c3 recognition or other similar proof. So make sure that you have that ready. Next slide, please. So the first decision that you will be faced with is which of the funders' absolute priority best fits your organization and the unique work that you're doing. So you'll have to choose one absolute priority and make sure that you clearly identify this priority in the project abstract and also throughout your application to make it as strong as possible. The first priority is non-rural and non-tribal communities. The second priority is rural communities. And the third is tribal communities. These priorities are separate funding categories, so applicants should pick the category that best matches the proposed service area for your organization. Next slide, please. And just to zoom out, we want to frame the work that you're doing and frame the application that you're preparing to submit. We want to encourage you to align with the funders' priorities throughout the work that you're doing to show how everything that your organization and your partner organizations do, how does that fit within this larger opportunity and their priorities? So here we just wanted to share quickly the funders' vision, which is to ensure all children growing up in promised neighborhoods, have access to great schools and strong family and community support systems that will prepare them to attain an excellent education and successfully transition to college and a career. So keep this in mind as you're writing the narrative, as you're writing even your budget narrative. Every piece of your application should carry these funder priorities in mind and how you align with that work and their priorities. Next slide, please. So how do you create a successful application? Next slide, please. First, let's start with the scoring process, because this is what you'll want to keep in mind. You'll want to write to the reviewers, write as if you're being scored, and make sure that to the best of your ability, you leave as few points on the table as possible. So there are 100 base points total. The first category is quality of project design. This is ultimately worth 40 total points. You'll want to keep in mind clear, measurable, ambitious, but achievable goals, meaningful community engagement, and be specific to how that applies to you and your partners. Include a strong logic model, and the logic model should be shaped by community and partner input. The second category is quality of the management plan. This is worth 30 total points. And it should include clear responsibilities, timelines, milestones, and budget alignment. It's important that all of those pieces are laid out and explain how they align, both with the opportunity and with the work that you're doing. You'll also need to include strong use of quantitative and qualitative data and adequate time commitments from project leadership and staff. The next category is adequacy of resources, and this is worth 30 points. You'll want to include information about your resources and infrastructure, your partners and their commitment, and the initial match and sustainability potential. Next slide, please. There are also some optional competitive preference points. These are not required, not necessary, but they will help improve the likelihood of funding for your organization's application if you were to pursue these. So we'll go through them a little bit here. You can earn up to an additional 15 points total. You can earn up to 5 extra points for evidence-based literacy, up to 5 extra points for high quality interventions, accelerated learning supports, or family learning supports, and up to 5 extra points for career connected learning. So anyone who's applying must clearly identify each competitive preference priority that you would like to have reviewed. So just be really clear and upfront about which of these you're pursuing so that you can be considered for those additional competitive preference points. Next slide, please. This grant also has a matching requirement component. Applicants must document committed match in your application. Non-rural, non-tribal projects must provide a match equal to at least 100% of the grant award, and rural or tribal projects must provide match equal to at least 50% of the grant award. At least 10% of the total match has to come from private sector cash or in-kind contributions, and your match can include public, private, philanthropic, and other eligible sources connected to pipeline services, LEA initiatives, or public health services. So just keep this in mind as you're building your budget and as you're going through that budget narrative. Make sure that you really flesh out this matching requirement as it pertains to the type of work and the type of organization. Next slide, please. So what do you need to do? If I could have you pay attention to one slide in particular, it would certainly be this one. These are what a good high quality application will always include. So first, you'll define a specific geographic neighborhood or neighborhoods. You'll be really detailed. You'll explain who's involved, the area that you're serving, and what the need is. Then you'll explain why the community was selected. As much as you can, try to support that need with data and don't let the data hang there alone. Make sure that you lead into the data and explain why it's relevant to your community and how it supports the need. Then you'll want to identify existing assets and gaps. What are we missing? What do you have that's working for you? What do you need to make this successful? And how does that play into this request? Then you'll want to build or expand a coordinated pipeline of services from early childhood to post-secondary and career success. What does that pipeline look like? What does the timeline look like? Who's involved? How will you build that success? And really give those details, paint a picture for the people who are scoring the application so that they understand what that pipeline looks like, who's involved, and why it is so critical for your community. You'll also want to ensure that services are accessible to children with disabilities and English learners. How are these communities and these groups going to be served by this project, and what makes the work that you're doing unique? Really show that to the people scoring the application. And then finally, you'll want to show how the project will improve outcomes over that required 5-year period. So again, going back to the timeline piece, what does it look like as you're implementing the work? What does it look like in the short term, the medium term, and the long term? And really flesh that out for the people who will be scoring your application. Don't make them look for this information. Try to break it out, use headers, make it clear how you're meeting each of these requirements for the project. Next slide, please. So we would recommend starting with your needs assessment. What do you need to do? What's the best place to start? I know that this can be really burdensome for organizations and it can seem like a momentous task. So we've tried to break it down a little bit and make it a little bit easier for you to get started. So first you'll need population size and scope. You'll also need poverty, academic, health, safety, mobility, absenteeism, and other related distress indicators. What are those indicators and how did they come into play for your specific community? And how does that correspond with the needs statement that you're going to include? You'll need school performance data, early childhood readiness data, if that's available to you, youth transition, graduation, post-secondary, and workforce data. Again, if you can show that, that will help illustrate that pipeline, that cradle to career, and how all of that is going to be established with this project. You'll also need a community asset map, schools, early learning providers, health providers, family supports, businesses, higher education, and workforce partners. How do those key players all come together in your community, and what does that look like? How do those roles integrate with one another, and how does it ultimately lead to the success of your project? You'll also need community input from families, from students, from community members, and other partners. What do they feel that your community needs? How does this work meet that need? Is there a way that you could pivot to better fit a project to this request and also to that community need? And then finally, just keep in mind that data should be recent. The NOFO notes that the information used to identify pipeline services should not be more than 3 years old. So we want to show the current day impact and the current day need for this project. Keep it relevant, keep it timely, and show why the work that your organization is doing is important. Next slide, please. There's also that element of required pipeline services. We've kind of talked through this a little bit, but just to break it out in a bit more detail, you will need to be able to show early learning opportunities, family supports that help caregivers promote early learning and other childhood development opportunities, diagnostic assessments and referrals for children with disabilities and developmental delays. You'll need K through 12 academic supports and school improvement strategies, expanded learning time or enrichment where that's appropriate if that applies to your organization. You'll need supports for transitions into middle school, high school, post-secondary education, and future careers. You'll need to include social, health, nutrition, and mental health services if those apply to your organization. And then finally, school community partnerships that integrate academic, family, health, and social supports. So again, just really developing that pipeline. How does the work that you do now set a child up for success throughout the rest of their education and into post-secondary or into their future career? How does that pipeline work? How does your organization fit into that pipeline? And how do you set those children up for success? Next slide, please. You'll also want to establish your partnerships very early on. It is our recommendation that this is one of the first things that you work on, and the earlier that you can establish this, the better you will be. We'll also touch base here a little bit about MOUs as well, which are a component of this process. So again, like we said, we want you to identify all implementation partners early, figure out who's involved, what their role will be, and how that comes into play for this bigger application process. You'll want to secure a preliminary MOU signed by each partner and keep track of those so that you have them available when you go to submit your application. The MOU should describe each partner's programmatic role, their financial contribution or match, their staffing or service commitment, their data sharing responsibilities, and if they have a long-term commitment beyond the grant period. Again, forward-looking 5 years plus How does that work? What is their commitment? And what does that partnership look like for you, for them, and for the project? Nonprofit applicants must also include an MOU with at least one required partner, like a high-need LEA, IHE, local government office, tribe, or tribal organization. Next slide, please. You'll also want to think about community engagement as a whole, more high level. What will this project do for your community and what does that look like? So you'll want to explain how families and community members helped shape the application. Did you get a lot of feedback from parents in your community about, hey, I've noticed that the students would benefit from this type of programming or from this type of project? Or was it brought to you by educators? How did those community members shape this project and what is the need? You'll want to describe how they will continue to participate. Is this something that parents will regularly be involved with? Will you meet regularly with educators? What does that continued involvement look like? You'll also want to include representative participation from neighborhood residents and other members of your community. You'll want to describe practices that help families and community members support student achievement and childhood development. And you'll want to show how community input will be used for continuous improvement as your project progresses. How will you review the feedback that you're getting? What processes are in place for breaking down that feedback, sort of absorbing it and then implementing it in your project as you move forward and beyond? How will feedback continue to shape the work that you're doing? Next slide, please. Data and evaluation are also critical components of the application. I can't understate the importance of using timely, detailed data in your application. So an applicant should describe how they will collect, analyze, report, and use reliable performance data. And the project should include measurable annual objectives for each grant year. So break them down by year and explain in a timeline or however you choose to break it out in your application. Make sure that you're including annual objectives for each year of the project. Required performance areas will include kindergarten readiness, academic proficiency, attendance, chronic absenteeism, high school graduation, post-secondary enrollment and completion, health, safety, mobility, family support, internet access, and other related outcomes. And keep in mind that grantees must report annually and make certain data publicly available in accessible formats for families and for members of your community to review. And again, that continuous feedback loop for improvement and implementation. And one of the recommendations, we'll get into this a little bit further into the presentation, but you want to make sure that you're supporting your data. Timely and relevant data is critical, but just as critical is explaining how that data applies to your project, to the people who are reading your application to score it. So make sure that every time that you use data, it is supported in your narrative as well. Next slide, please. So here's a quick checklist for the total application package. You can see we've got two columns here. So on the left-hand side of your screen, these forms are provided by the funder and you'll complete them in grants.gov. And then on the right-hand side of your screen, these are attachments or documents that you will need to create. There is not necessarily a provided form or something in grants.gov for you to use. So just kind of skimming through quickly, on the left-hand side, these are the provided forms. You have your SF424, your supplemental information, your SF424A, your assurances and your certifications, and all of your lobbying forms that are listed there. And then the items that you will need to create are the abstract, the narrative, the budget narrative, a reference list, any resumes, letters of support or commitment, those MOUs we discussed, and then evidence documentation and citations for any of the competitive preference priorities, if that's applicable in something that you're pursuing. So just to give you a high level overview so you can start to prepare, the items on the left available in grants.gov, the items on the right you and your team should be preparing to create. Next slide, please. We've also prepared some budget narrative tips here. So specifically when you're working through your budget and describing to those scorers, how funding will be used, you'll want to keep these items in mind. So this program allows an unrestricted indirect cost rate. The budget has to align with the project design and a 5-year work plan like we've discussed. You should explain each cost clearly year by year for that 5-year period. You should include personnel, fringe, travel, equipment, supplies, contractual, construction, and other costs if they're applicable, plus those indirect costs. That SF 424A requires a detailed 1-year budget information breakdown. The budget narrative should provide the itemized breakdown for all of the project years. And then make sure that that match shown in the budget also aligns with the partner letters and MOUs that you submitted. So make sure whatever that committed matches is also detailed in those MOUs and everything adds up so that what you're detailing in the budget and in the budget narrative will also align with those MOUs that you're attaching, and everything matches and makes sense for the people who are scoring your application. Next slide, please. You'll also want to complete the federal registration process, which, depending on what your organization has already done, may be a 2-step process. And one of the reasons we really wanted to share detailed information about this specifically is because it can take some time. So it's best to start thinking about this now. And even if you have already registered with SAM.gov in the past, you may want to just log in and ensure that your registration is still up to date, is still active, and ready to go when you're ready to move forward with the application. So starting with SAM.gov, the organization must have an active SAM.gov registration. The SAM.gov website will issue the organization's unique identity ID, which is your UEI. This process can take some time, and the NOFO recommends, and so do we here at Grants Plus, that you begin this process very early. And SAM registration must be updated annually. So again, even if you've done this process before, best for you to log in and just make sure that everything is up to date and that your registration is still active. And just to note that SAM.gov information can take anywhere from 24 to 48 hours, and keep in mind business days and holidays, to become available in that grants.gov website after SAM.gov registration is active. Then once you've created your SAM.gov login, or you've ensured that it's up to date and active, you'll want to set up a grants.gov account and go through this process. So you'll create an active grants.gov account, you'll link the organization's UEI, you'll make sure that the UEI and the application match the UEI that's used in your SAM.gov application. And then you'll also use the EBIZ POC authorized official, and that should ensure that the right team members will have access to this account. So again, this is a 2-step process, and we really want to make sure that we're flagging that this can take some time, and it is multi-step across multiple websites. So please start thinking about this now if you haven't already. Next slide, please. So the submission process is completed through grants.gov, and just a high-level overview of that process here in case if this is new to you, new to your organization. You'll apply through the grants.gov workspace. This workspace allows multiple team members to work on different forms at the same time. You'll want to submit early. Don't wait until deadline day in case you encounter a hiccup, or in case if you find things that need to be corrected or updated. Grants.gov must successfully validate the application before the deadline, and a rejected application must be corrected and resubmitted before 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on that deadline date. So if for any reason there's something that needs corrected, if your application is rejected, if you encounter a hiccup, you just need to keep that deadline in mind and make sure that you fix it prior to that deadline. And then we also recommend that after you submit, continue to check your application status in grants.gov. Make sure that everything looks correct, that you're not noticing, any error messages or that something has disappeared that should have been there. Don't rely on email confirmations alone. Those are great, but make sure that you're monitoring that portal shortly after submission just to make sure that everything looks as it should. Next slide, please. So now we'll move into some tips and tricks for success. Our team here at Grants Plus, we've done many large scale federal and state grant opportunities in the past, and we've taken a lot of feedback from our team, from clients, and compiled it into a list here to share with you all today about the ways that you can make your application the strongest and the most competitive for your organization. Next slide, please. So we've first broken out a practical work plan here. Again, you'll need to tailor this to the specific needs of your organization. Every organization is different, and you'll need to take into account your staff's capacity, any time off. But just at a high level, this is a practical work plan timeline that we've kind of put together here to share with you today. So that first bullet point, you'll see it's ASAP, so as soon as possible, but definitely by the end of week 1, which we have is next week, June 29th to July 10th. So definitely by the end of that first week, you'll want to confirm eligibility, who's the lead applicant, what is the partner structure, which absolute priority are you going to pursue, and what fits your organization. Are you going to pursue any of the competitive preference priorities? And you'll want to make sure that you get that SAM.gov and grants.gov status moving forward quickly. You'll also want to develop an application management plan and assign any writing responsibilities so that you know who is tasked with which piece as you kick off. From weeks 1 to 2, you'll want to gather community needs data, school performance data, asset maps, pipeline service information, segmentation analysis data, and evidence that supports proposed interventions. You'll want to begin collecting partner commitments and matching fund documentation, again, as early as possible, and make sure you have a designated place where everyone is saving that partner information, those MOUs, and any information pertaining to match, so it's all available in one centralized location. Then in weeks 2 to 3, that's early to mid-July, you'll want to draft the needs assessment, the community asset analysis, your pipeline services strategy, your logic model, performance measures, and measurable annual objectives. You'll also want to identify data collection and evaluation methods. Then from weeks 3 to 4, which is mid to late July, you want to finalize those budget assumptions, your staffing plan, get those match commitments locked down, get those preliminary MOUs back from those partners so that you have them ready to go, those letters of support and required partner documentation, and then you'll want to complete the budget narrative development as well. In weeks 4 to 5, that's late July, you'll want to draft and refine the full project narrative, iterate back and forth with your team, make sure that you have multiple people reading that draft, checking for accuracy both in the scope of work that you're performing, but then also any of those technical editing details as well. You'll want to work on the project abstract, the competitive preference priority responses, and any supporting attachments. You'll want to work on those federal forms to get those started. And then in that final push, that final week, you'll want to conduct compliance and scoring reviews against all the selection criteria. Have an internal person or an internal team who sits down with those scoring points we discussed earlier that total up to 100 plus those extra 15 competitive points. Put your application pieces next to those scoring and self-score. Have maybe someone who's not as familiar with this work read it and have them read to make sure that it makes sense or there's not any obvious questions or errors that they're noticing that maybe you've overlooked. You'll want to verify page limits and attachments, confirm those MOUs that you've got everything all lined up and ready to go, that match documentation. You'll want to make sure that you validated grants.gov, the submission package, and then you'll want to plan to submit at least 24 to 48 hours before the August 6th deadline, just to give yourself some breathing room. Sometimes portals can be wonky, computers can be wonky. You don't want to put yourself right up against that deadline to the best of your ability. And that allows you some time to address any validation errors or any other technical concerns that you might come up against. Next slide, please. So, what do strong promise neighborhood applications have in common? In our experience, it's these few things. They confirm key partners before the application is developed, and they secure letters of support and MOUs as early as possible. Again, early bird gets the worm with this project. The sooner that you can get some of these things locked in, the more time you have to focus on drafting those pieces and putting your application together. Successful applications also bring all critical personnel to the kickoff meeting, including program people, your finance team, any evaluation folks, and partnership leads. All of those key players are in most of the meetings so that you can make decisions on the spot rather than having to take decisions back to those key players who weren't able to attend. If you can get everybody in the same room as often as possible, your meetings will be more productive and decisions will be made more quickly. You'll also want to establish a clear project management structure with defined roles, deadlines, and a single document sharing platform. This will just streamline the process. Everyone is working from the same place. Everyone can see if things are being edited or updated. You'll also want to begin your budget development early and align the budget decisions with the program design and narrative development. Too often, we see these two things operating in silos. You have folks who are working on the written narrative pieces, the abstract, describing your project. And then you have folks, often, a member of finance and some other team members who are working on that budget. And then sometimes those things don't make sense together. So if you can begin your budget development early and align those two pieces so that your narrative is appropriately describing and explaining your budget and that budget narrative, your application will be much stronger. Finally, you'll want to create a detailed application calendar that includes internal review deadlines well ahead of the submission date. The more folks that you can have reviewing and the more breathing room that you give yourself, the more likely a chance you have for a successful application. Next slide, please. We also met with our team to discuss some common challenges we see folks experience. And we've listed some of them out here. So one of the first things that came up was that program design discussions continue way too late into the application process. If you can figure out what your program looks like, the scope of your project, the work that's being done very early on in that timeline, then it gives you more time throughout the rest of that process to develop those application pieces. What makes a team unsuccessful often is when those development conversations are still happening, a week or two out from the deadline. That's too late. Those decisions and that sort of development needs to be happening up front. A second challenge is that partners are identified but not fully engaged in decision making or document development. It's a partnership for a reason. You want everybody to be involved to the extent that it makes sense so that everyone is aware of what's happening and can give their input. Another common challenge is that budget development occurs independently from the narrative development. That's what we were just discussing in that last slide. You do not want those two things to happen in independent silos. It all needs to make sense together and be woven together into a cohesive application. Another common challenge is that there are multiple versions of documents and file sharing systems that ultimately create confusion. Again, whatever works for your team and your organization, but if you can create one centralized location with a naming convention and a saving convention, it will help your team work in the most effective way. Finally, another challenge is that key decision makers are often absent from planning meetings that results in delayed approvals and revisions. So again, the more that you can get those key players, those decision makers in a room together, the more likely you will be to be successful, and particularly successful early on in the process to give you the most time possible to actually work on those pieces. Next slide, please. At Grants Plus, we also have some recommendations for a competitive application. So first, we recommend that you finalize partnerships and government structures early. Launch your budget development during the first month, and now we're in those final stages. So in the first few weeks of your application planning, if you haven't done so already. Separate program planning from proposal writing meetings whenever possible. Maintain one project management and file sharing system. Build in structured review periods for leadership, finance, and any of your partners. A key pitfall that we see folks fall into sometimes is that they don't build in enough time for review. They're writing right up until basically deadline day. You want to give yourself that space to let those decision makers, to let those other teams, to let those partners read through and make sure that everything makes sense to them. You'll also want to use the NOFO scoring criteria as an organizing framework from day one. So as soon as you start pulling these pieces together, getting those MOUs, writing those pieces, make sure that through every step of the way, there's a point at which you pause and compare it to the NOFO. Finally, submit drafts early enough that allows time for meaningful revision and for quality control within your team. Next slide, please. We've also come up with 10 proposal writing tips for success. These are not necessarily specific to this NOFO, although some of them are, but these are just tried and true tips and tricks that Grants Plus has developed over the years. We have a deep bench of individuals here who bring a lot of expertise to the table. And we have found that when you do these 10 things, your application is much stronger and much better written. So first, you will always want to write to the scoring criteria first. This means organizing your narrative around the selection criteria and the point values that 100 points plus the 15 extra. Keep in mind that reviewers score against the rubric, not against how compelling the need might be. So your organization may have a great need, but if your application is missing pieces or if some of your pieces are weak, they have to grade against that rubric. So make sure that when you're writing and when you're pulling those pieces together, you are also grading yourself against that same rubric. You should make it easy for the reviewers and for the scorers to find your evidence that earns points. Lay it out for them. Make it easy to find and super clear. Tip 2 is to use the NOFO's language and structure. You'll want to mirror the terminology and the requirements that are found in the NOFO. Use section headings that match what they've got in that documentation and align with the requirements. And make sure that, again, throughout the whole thing, you're aligning with the selection criteria in that NOFO to help reviewers quickly locate the required content for your application. Third is lead with the answer. Don't make them dig through 4 or 5 paragraphs before you finally answer the question that's being asked. Lead with the answer. You'll want to begin each section with a clear topic sentence that directly addresses the requirement before you provide all of the supporting details and data. Those other pieces are very important, but you want to make sure that they don't have to dig for the answer. You'll also want to support every claim with data. We've talked about this throughout the entire presentation. You'll want to pair your data and your assertions with local data whenever possible, again, as recent as 3 years or less. You want to keep it timely and relevant. You'll want to quantify needs, gaps, and expected outcomes rather than relying on broad statements about community challenges. Again, the more specific about support that you can get, the better off your application will be. You need to also connect need to a solution. You are the solution, and that is what you are trying to show the reviewers. So you'll need to demonstrate a clear line between identified needs, the proposed pipeline services, evidence-based strategies, and anticipated outcomes. The reviewers who are reviewing your application should be able to easily understand why you've included every activity, every piece of that pipeline, and why it needs to be you doing the work. You'll also want to highlight community and partner engagement. We don't operate alone. We are members of a community and a community of organizations. So you'll want to show how residents, families, schools, and community partners helped shape the proposal and will continue to guide your implementation and a feedback loop as you go forward. Strong community engagement is a requirement and also a competitive strength. So you'll want to make sure to keep that top of mind. You also will want to be specific about outcomes. You'll want to use measurable objectives, timelines, and performance indicators. Replace any of those general goals with concrete targets that demonstrate ambition and feasibility. So think SMART goals. They need to be timely and measured and attainable. They need to be detailed and not just high-level goals. What are you going to do and how are you going to accomplish it and in what timeline? You'll also want to demonstrate evidence and experience. You'll want to clearly describe the evidence base behind the proposed interventions and your or your partner's experience implementing similar strategies and how they were successful. You'll also want to make your partnerships tangible. Go beyond just listing your partners in your application. Describe each of your partner's roles, their resources, their responsibilities, and what their long-term commitment looks like to your implementation and your sustainability. It's a partnership for a reason, and make sure that you paint that in a way that those people who are reviewing your application can understand. Last but not least, and possibly most importantly, write for busy reviewers. We all know how busy we are in our day-to-day work. And the people who are reading these applications and scoring them are just as busy as we are. So you need to write for a busy person. You need to use descriptive headings so they don't have to look for information. Break it down like, here's the needs statement, here's the data that supports. Write in short but detailed paragraphs. Don't make them read something that goes on and on and on. If you can break things out into short, succinct, detailed paragraphs, it's easier for those people scoring to read and to digest. If you can include graphics, bullet points, tables where appropriate, and if it's something that can be uploaded into that grants.gov. And then use clear, organized proposals that are easier to score. And we find that these clear, organized proposals often score higher because reviewers can actually locate the information that they're looking for. So sometimes your proposal can have all of that information in it, but if they can't find it, then it's no good. Next slide, please. Also just wanted to flag quickly, if you have previously applied to a Promise Neighborhoods opportunity, start with your past feedback. Before you begin a new application, request and review your reviewers' feedback from your previous application. Look at those scoring summaries, identify patterns. Where did you do really well so that you know that you can keep doing that again? Where did you maybe lose points so you can use that as an opportunity to improve? And compare those past scores against this current selection criteria so that you get an idea of how they're presently scoring. You can also determine whether your weaknesses were related to the project design itself, if it was a capacity issue, if it was a partnerships issue, if you didn't have enough evidence, or if it was a budget justification issue. Maybe you were stronger in some of those areas and weaker in others. You'll also want to assess whether previously identified gaps have been addressed and use those reviewer comments as a roadmap for strengthening narrative sections and supporting that documentation. Next slide, please. Just some quick file upload tips, just to make sure that these are on your radar. You'll want to upload the narrative sections and attachments as PDFs, specifically read-only flattened PDFs whenever possible. Don't upload files multiple files with the same name. Make sure you have a unique naming convention for each of the files that you're including that's descriptive of what it is. Again, make sure you align if there's any guidance in the NOFO, align with that. You want to keep the file names under 50 characters. Avoid any special characters that can cause upload or validation issues, avoid asterisks, ampersands, those types of things. And then make sure that you check the total size of your application package before you submit it. Next slide, please. And just to wrap up, if you have any questions throughout this process, we wanted to include this slide here. There is a left and a right column. We realize that we might not be exactly posed to address some of your specific and unique questions that are unique to your organization's specific situation. So we wanted to provide you the resources in case you have those types of questions. So on the left-hand side, you'll see if you have questions about the Promise Neighborhood opportunity, how your organization fits, if they have any guidance, or if you have specific questions about implementation or your application, these are where you will want to direct those. So they do provide Mr. Wilson's contact information here. We do have his email and his phone number. And again, you'll want to direct questions related to program requirements, eligibility, any of the content of your application, competitive priorities, if activities are allowable, and any NOFO interpretation questions. If you want guidance on how you're interpreting something, that's where those would likely be best situated.
Marissa, just to chime in that they are hosting two office hours on the 30th and the 2nd, I think it is. And I'm that information, I can put a link to that information so you can you have to register for those.
Thank you, Lauren. That's great. And then on the right, specifically, I know that especially the SAM.gov registration process can cause a little bit of confusion depending on your organization and your unique needs. So we did also want to provide information here about any questions registering for SAM.gov. They do have a federal service desk. They're prepared to answer these types of questions, help walk you through it. I've used it myself. They're really, really helpful. So you'll visit fsd.gov and go through that process for free technical assistance. And they can help with things like support, technical support, frequently asked questions, chatting with a live support agent, submitting a help request, contacting them specifically with questions about registration or renewing your registration, account validation, those types of things. And again, particularly with the SAM.gov, you'll want to reach out to them sooner rather than later. That process does take a little bit of time. And after you register for SAM.gov, it will take that 24 to 48 hours before then you can port all of that information into the grants.gov, where you will eventually submit the application. So again, these resources are available to you should you have any questions. We wanted to share that with you so you knew at least where to get started. Next slide, please. That concludes our presentation. I don't know if Lauren, if you'd like to share anything.
Yes, I've been trying to answer questions in the chat. What I will do after this, we will send the slides so you can get all of those, and I will also summarize what the questions and answers were, just so that if you missed them coming and going, I think that's what I have. Oh, Erica has been so patiently waiting to ask a question, and we do have 2 minutes left. Sure. Erica, do you want to come off mute? Are you able to? I wonder if she's able to.
It is possible the audience members may not be able to.
Yeah, she had her hand raised. Maybe it wasn't intentional because it looks like it went down.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any burning questions? And you can throw them in the chat if you cannot speak. Yeah. Page limits question,
Yeah,
50 pages is shorter. What were you going to say, Marissa? Go ahead.
Oh, just that the page limit is 50 pages.
Yeah.
I don't want to speak out of turn about if that is 100% confirmed. That is what the NOFO said at the time that I was putting this presentation together. If it is your question, if it's a hard requirement, again, that might be something where you reach out to that contact on our previous slide. Jody, if you're able to just go back one. Just to confirm if that page limit is hard, again, at the time of us putting together this presentation,
Mhm.
that is the guidance that's available.
Someone said the limit is only listed for the project narrative.
Yeah. If you have questions, again, it might be best to reach out to get technical clarity for things like that from the Promise Neighborhoods program contact.
All right. Well, it looks like we're at 3:30, so I think we need to
Thank
wrap
you.
up. But thank you all so much for your attention, Marissa. Thank you so much for the
Thank you.
information. And like I said, we'll follow up with the answers that we were able to provide. I'll look and see if we missed anything and fill that in. And again, thank you so, so much.
Thank you all.